Hello and welcome to this evening's virtual conference. So we're just going to wait just a few moments as everybody joins us and allow for any system latency. So it looks as though most people have been able to join us. Can I get you just to give us a thumbs up if you can hear me loud and clear? Thank you. Wonderful. If at any time there's any issue regarding what you can hear or what you can see, if you just put something in the chat, and one of us will be jumping in on it and trying to fix and resolve that. So welcome. My name is Ayman Mulali, and welcome to our virtual conference. This is a repeat of the conference we had just a week ago at St George's Cathedral in Southwark, in London, in the UK. So I've just got a few people who are not on mute. So if if I can just get you to check whether you're muted or not, and to go on mute, that'd be fabulous. Thank you so much. My name is Ayman Mulali, and I'm one of the trustees of the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome. We were founded in 2006 as a non-denominational association to support walkers, cyclists, or in fact horseback riders as well, in making their journey from Canterbury to Rome along this historic pilgrim route. And in practice, our focus is on the way charted by Archbishop Cedric in AD 990, the Via Francigena. The Via Francigena, as many of you will know, which is the route of the Franks through France and on to the Holy City itself. So we're a British charity, but only about 43% of our members are in the UK. It's about 30% in the United States and Canada, 17% from Australia, and another 10% from New Zealand and other countries. Anyone here so my assumption is that everyone here today is outside the UK. So welcome, a big international welcome to people from across the world. So we've got really a very full program this evening, and in a moment I'll introduce to our first speaker. But I know that when we did the conference actually in Southwark, we had a short video. Do we have that available tonight, or are we going to go straight? We'll go straight to the conference, to the call. We'll go straight into it. Okay. So our first speaker is Dawn, who's from the British Pilgrim Trust. Just as by way of introduction to Dawn, to say that clearly, although this is about pilgrimage, as I said earlier, the majority of people, in fact, that complete the pilgrimage from Britain, from Canterbury to Rome, are doing it for other reasons than religious reasons. Well, whereas the language of pilgrimage is absolutely appropriate for what we're doing, for many it'll be slightly unusual. So with that, Dawn, what I'm going to do is then hand over to you and let you speak, and Dawn will talk to us about the role of the British Pilgrims to Rome.
And Dawn, because I know you're just going to get your screen ready, but just in the meantime, as a bit of housekeeping, first of all, a big hello from me. I'm Alex Knox and also one of the trustees. Would love to encourage you to well, interact as directly as possible. I'm aware that this is not a conference in the sense of us all being in a big hall. This is us all in our own homes. So please do make use of the chat function on Zoom, which you can access at the bottom of your screens. At the end of this evening, I keep saying this evening, but I'm aware that for lots of you it may be morning. But at the end of this webinar, there'll be time for a Q&A. But if you have any direct questions to any of the speakers as they're speaking, there may be time, 5 minutes or so at the end of each talk, just for some direct questions specific to the talk. So do feel free to type those into the chat. Anyway, enough of me. Over to Dawn.
I just realised I was still on mute there. There we go. Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Well, what a treat to be able to talk to people in the warm and dry for a change, instead of being out on a windy hilltop. So this really is lovely. Yes, so I work for the British Pilgrimage Trust, which is a charity set up to revive a culture of pilgrimage in Britain. We lost our practice in 1538 when Henry VIII banned it. And now a lot of people feel like they have to go abroad to make pilgrimage. But fortunately, with the Via Francigena, you've just got that lovely little leg from Canterbury to Dover, or in fact, maybe even the London extension that we'll hear more about, I'm sure. Which means you qualify as a British pilgrimage. So hence I get to come along and speak to you lovely people. So I'll just say a little bit about my role. And so I kind of sort of deal with the development of pilgrimage infrastructure across the country. And that takes the form of all sorts of different projects. So one of them is developing our sanctuary scheme, which is where we encourage churches, village halls, sports pavilions, any kind of community building to offer floor space to pilgrims so that they can sleep overnight and not have to spend a fortune on traditional accommodation. I also develop a guided pilgrimage programme, which helps to introduce the practice to pilgrims and kind of showcase it in all the different forms that it takes in this country. I work with different communities to create infrastructure to enable pilgrimage to happen, to help pilgrims to feel welcome in all of those little places that they need to stop off on their journeys. And I also get to do route development, which is fantastic. And in that bottom right corner there, you can see one of the routes that I manage, which is the Old Way, and that runs from Southampton to Canterbury. I just kind of wanted to share sort of one of my sort of personal experiences around the universality of pilgrimage, as Eamon was saying about how it seems to be a very broad practice in its modern incarnation. And for me, this was a day when I was actually walking along part of the Old Way, looking for locations to set up waymarks. And I've been trudging along through the mud in this woodland. And as I came out, so I realised that the path that I was walking along had risen above the landscape. And here and there, I could see very well-ordered flints kind of poking through the turf. And I thought, hang on a minute, this really looks like it's an old Roman road. And so I got out the map and I had a good look. And sure enough, I was now standing on a Roman agger. That is the raised sort of earthwork, sort of consolidation that makes up a Roman road. And this particular feature runs through the landscape between London and Chichester. And suddenly my mind was taken off to all of these Roman travellers trudging up and down this Roman highway, which would have included pilgrims. So obviously well before Christianity came to Britain, pilgrims would have been travelling between London and Chichester to visit the temple of Minerva and Neptune in that city, long before they even thought of building a cathedral there. And so the Old Way is it's a modern pilgrimage route inspired by a medieval map, which is built on top of a Roman road. And, you know, pilgrims have been using this route on and off for centuries. And so it's that continuation of the tradition, which I personally find very inspiring. So we know the story of the Via Francigena, this idea of Archbishop Sigeric the Serious going off to Rome to collect his pallium. So there he was, a medieval pilgrim taking a route that would have been walked by the Romans. But not very many people realize that the origins of the VF might even be older than that. It might even have pre-Roman pilgrims on it, because the Romans laid down their roads in Britain over a route that these days we call the Harrow Way. And that's a route that goes along the North Downs ridgeline. And that took prehistoric pilgrims off to places like Stonehenge and Avebury. So this idea of international travel between Britain and the European, sort of continental Europe, and people making these journeys to spiritual places for all sorts of reasons is really testament to this idea that pilgrimage is, I think, a human need. I think there is an urge that we have to go out to do it. and whatever particular faith or spirituality that we might use as a lens for those journeys. I think many of us can really kind of associate our particular motivations with this idea of really feeling the need to go out and make these special journeys with significance. So pilgrimage has driven us since ancient hunter-gatherers have followed these well-worn tracks. So this here you can see is a row of stones that follow a processional route to West Kennet Avenue, and that forms part of the Stonehenge ancient landscape. So you can absolutely see these pilgrims making their way along to all of these special sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge. There have always been pilgrims, whether they were going to places in the British landscape or off to visit the oracles at Delphi, perhaps, with this desire to find a personal meaning through travel, coupled with a network of well-established routes. And these in turn became ritualized journeys, which these days are much more than these kind of journeys of penance or healing or leisure that we might associate with the Canterbury Tales. So it's as simple as a journey with purpose to a significant place. I like to think there are as many reasons for making pilgrimage as there are pilgrims themselves. And today we're noticing this global renaissance in pilgrimage. This particular monument that you see here, this is in Ireland. It's in Wexford. It's called the Tulloch of Solace, and it's actually a modern monument that's been inspired by some of the chambered tombs that they have out there. And it was built to commemorate an Irish rebellion, but also the development of Ireland during the Renaissance. And it's okay. Well, do you know what? I'm just going to get on with it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So where did I get to? So I got to talking about this modern revival of pilgrimage. And so this modern monument that you see in front of me, the Tulloch of Solace, is a big destination for modern pilgrims now, even though it's not necessarily a spiritual place, and even though it's less than 10 years old, but it's still kind of driving people to seek sort of deeply personal reasons in their journey. So with this global renaissance of pilgrimage, obviously we have the Via Francigena, we have the Camino de Santiago, the Hajj, the Cwm Mela. But Britain alone has over 250 modern routes. So why are we doing it? Why are all these people making pilgrimage now? Well, the late John Briley once said to me, if we knew why, we probably wouldn't be doing it at all. This idea that, you are seeking answers, perhaps, when you set out on your journey. But that doesn't help me to do my job. I need to have a much better understanding of pilgrims and what they want and what they need from their journey, so that I can ensure where we're building infrastructure, where we're putting developments in place, that they're meeting those needs. And so we've set up a model for modern pilgrims, which groups people together. Now, I should be clear, no one individual pilgrim will fit completely into one of these categories. Most people will recognize certain elements of it, certain elements of themselves across multiple categories. But by grouping these kind of archetypes together, it helps us make sure that we're considering all these various different types and needs. So hopefully you can see images of 3 people on the screen there. And the first one is a chap called Graham, and he represents our serial seekers. So he goes out every year and does a big long journey. And our serial seekers want that next big journey. They probably started out with quite a well-known route like the Camino de Santiago. They're bought into the intellectual or cultural aspects of pilgrimage. It's their main pastime. They enjoy planning it, discussing it, studying, blogging, of course, making pilgrimage. Maybe they attend presentations and conferences to do with pilgrimage as well. They love to use a guidebook. They know how to read a map properly. And for them, they have quite a strong spiritual focus as part of their journey. They're more inclined to choose routes that have historical accuracy or authenticity, perhaps a route which has been inspired by someone who was making their journey nearly, 1,500 years ago. and that authenticity is important to them, as is a traditional large holy destination, perhaps Rome, for example. They expect decent infrastructure, but they won't be put off by challenges. And these are quite different from our inner changes. And this here is represented for us by the lovely Emma Bridgewater, who walked the old way last year. And they want something to change, or a way to mark a change in their lives. Perhaps they've hit a milestone, they've experienced a bereavement, maybe they're looking for a change of purpose. And usually their journey is intended as just a one-off. They usually have other pursuits or other priorities. They might be less interested in the philosophy of pilgrimage or identifying as part of the pilgrim community in general, but they are interested in exploring a sense of spirituality, especially if they haven't explored this before. Their focus is on well-being, and their route choice speaks to them as something individual. The reputation of it's less important, but they quite like easy planning, and they'll be put off with this quite poor infrastructure. And then lastly, our last group are what we call the conscious questers, and these are people that want a bit of adventure, but they're looking for something a bit different from the usual kind of Instagram travel destinations. They don't want to be doing sort of the cliche gap year stuff. They're looking for meaningful travel experiences. They're bought into these ideas of social connection through pilgrimage, through slow travel, through eco travel. And whilst they might be less interested in the intellectual aspects of the pilgrim community, they do kind of tend to wear that as part of their identity. They're usually younger, they love digital mapping, they've probably got a solar charger, and their focus is as much about the physical challenge as it is the spiritual. It's almost a rite of passage, if you will. So their route choice is usually something that's got an interesting story, a good reputation, or iconic places along the route. They love things that have got good value for money, and they're not going to be put off by challenging infrastructure. That's kind of all part of the challenge, really. You might have noticed I've been talking about spirituality more than I've been talking about religion. And that's because there is very much a spectrum of spirituality for people. Now, this really took me by surprise when I started to work for the British Pilgrimage Trust. I think, like a lot of people, I assumed most pilgrims would be Christian. But there are many people, as many people who identify spiritual but not religious as there are Christian. And so you can see over half of pilgrims here actually don't identify as having any specific faith at all. And you'll even find people who call themselves pilgrims but are consider themselves atheist or humanist or agnostic as well, out on these routes. So there really is a broad mix of backgrounds and beliefs that go into making up the pilgrimage community. So what is it that's driving everybody to make these journeys? Well, there are as many motivations as there are pilgrims, but individually, once you start asking people questions to kind of really think about their journeys, the most significant motivations are things like emotional well-being, connecting with nature, exploring their spirituality, engaging with cultural heritage, and also their health and physical well-being. So out of the 13 categories that we test, religious observance is one of the lowest scoring, even among pilgrims identifying as holding a traditional faith. So people are walking with their faith, not necessarily because of it. And people do tend to pick more than one as well, which shows how important it is that there is a variety of experience for modern pilgrims. So the most successful routes are routes which will be able to enable access to this broader variety of experience. And it means that everybody has a role to play in kind of building the culture of pilgrimage. If you've made pilgrimage on more than one route, you'll notice that the particular routes and the communities that walk them tend to kind of have their own personality in a way. And I think that's made up by the focus on all these different elements, these different motivators that sort of inform how they grow and develop. Now, see, this is kind of what I do. This is all stuff that helps me in my job. But as pilgrims, you haven't got to worry about that. You don't have to kind of sit down and, when you're planning your kit list, also work out what your motivation is for making your journey. That's by the by. You don't have to make your mind up at all. But at the British Pilgrimage Trust, we do recommend that you set your intention. And this is a way to kind of help put an element of focus on your pilgrimage. You'll find things will resonate more clearly with your intention, all these little moments that you experience along the way. So we all usually have perhaps something we want to let go of, or something we want to bring into our lives. Perhaps there's a question we'd like to ask ourselves. Maybe you'd like to mark or make a change and you'd like to find out what that is. Or, you know, just like I was mentioning earlier, perhaps you've reached a milestone in your life and you'd like a way to mark that. And that's as simple as just kind of thinking about what you'd like your intention to be on the first day that you set out. Your intention may change over the course of your journey. You may well finish that journey with a completely different intention going forward than you set out. Who knows? But it's worth kind of taking the time to set that before you set out. So normally here, I would ask some questions about the kinds of journeys that people have made. But what I'm just going to do is sort of give you a bit of information about what might be obstacles for people. So quite often when I get chatting to people and they find out what I do, they go, "Oh, I'd love to make pilgrimage." And I sort of say, "Well, what's stopping you?" And what's interesting is for most women, it's that thought of striking out on their own is a really big obstacle. So it's men in younger age groups who are more likely to have made these journeys alone, with women preferring to go in groups of 2 or 3. And that obviously involves a greater degree of coordination and everyone being able to have the time off together. And often this is due to concerns about how safe women really are, particularly in rural isolation, and with the confidence in their navigation coming up as an issue too. So one of the roles I had before I came to the British Pilgrimage Trust was as a personal safety trainer. And it's another one of those lovely surprising facts that it's actually men that are far more at risk of assault by a stranger than women are. So I would absolutely say to any women that were on the call this evening, if you are tempted to go and make pilgrimage on your own, go and do it. Go and do it. It is far, far safer than you might believe it to be. And you'll find the vast majority of people that you meet are kind and helpful. We're far more at risk of things like road traffic accidents, slips, trips and falls, illness being brought on by the weather than we are of strangers. And it's that kind of sense of control and of choice, familiarity is what affects our perception of our safety, how safe we feel we are. So men are not immune to rural or urban hazards. So we've put together a little safety toolkit for pilgrims. So hopefully you've jotted down that web address there. And that sort of kind of gives you a lot of really useful hints and tips that you might want to think about. Now, there's some good stuff to kind of just prepare for your safety. So thinking about the kit that you need for your terrain is a given. And I know there's lots of kind of blogs and lots of advice about their specific to the Via Francigena. But quite often what people forget to do is around checking their mobile network coverage. So most, in fact, if not all, mobile phone, sort of the network providers have websites where you can actually log on and check the network coverage areas. So if you do this in advance of going out, it's really useful to know where you might be in a dead spot where you don't have any signal, but importantly, how far you will have to travel in order to get signal again. And sometimes your closest kind of spot for signal might be actually half a mile behind you, rather than the 4 miles in front of you. So it's just one of those kind of really useful safety things to do, just to kind of check where you're going to have signal for that day's journeying. Knowing where you're going and kind of where you're headed is really important. I see quite a lot of conversation on sort of the Via Francigena forums about, oh, should I download the app? Do people use mapping apps? You know, should I stick to my hard copy guidebook? Have both. The app doesn't weigh anything, so you're not losing anything by having it on your phone, and being able to look up your live location along the route is really, really useful. And the other thing is around tracing your movements. So the old sort of traditional advice is to kind of let your destination know when you're due to arrive, and then just rely on them to remember to check in on you if you don't turn up. Well, that's no good if your plans change, and it's no good if they've forgotten about you. It's quite a lot of trust to put in a random stranger to kind of make sure that you're okay. But there are, again, modern solutions for it. So there are each different country have got its own safety apps. In Britain, I strongly recommend Hollyguard. It's very pink, but anybody can use it, and it's really useful because it keeps you in control of your movements. If your plans change, if you decide you want to spend an hour meditating on a hilltop somewhere, you can do that, and it won't raise any alerts. So like I said, each country has got its own safety app, and I recommend you look those up. So ladies, you are much safer than you might presume to be, and gentlemen, you probably need to think a little bit more about your safety than you have been doing. So please never assume that something won't happen to you. But if you make sure that you're packing up your personal safety kit as much as you are a good pair of walking socks, then I'm sure everyone's going to have a lovely, safe journey. So how am I doing for time? Oh, time's gone out the window because I've had to recap. So I'm just going to go straight to pilgrim practices, I think. And just to kind of talk about some of the things that the British Pilgrimage Trust recommend that people take the time to do. So a couple of years ago, the first time I set out with some Via Francigena pilgrims, I was stunned at how speedy you are. Really, really fast pace. And then I realized it's because you've got to get all the way to Rome. That's, you can't afford to hang about. So that explains the kind of distance and the pace that you like to have each day. But I would encourage you to build time into your itineraries if you can afford to slow down and engage in some pilgrim practices, because they will help you deepen the experience and perhaps have a far more engaging journey than you would do otherwise. So try and think about the 5 senses as a way of doing those. So the ladies that you can see in the picture here, they're engaged in a bit of forehead pressing. And that's literally as simple as they've taken themselves to the east end of the church, which is kind of the most spiritually charged part of the building, if you like. That's the end that's closest to the Holy Land. It's where the altar is. All of the prayers and all of the hymns, all of that energy all goes up to the east end of the building. So because they weren't able to get inside that day, they've gone up to the east end, and they're just taking the time to have a moment of stillness, a moment of contemplation, and just using that sensory contact of pressing their head to the building to maybe forge some new connections in their brains. So we also encourage you to do things like barefoot walking. If you are walking with a companion, maybe see if you can agree to have an hour or 2 in deliberate silence each day. Walking on your own is a very different experience to walking with a person, and walking in deliberate silence gives you the opportunity to experience that without necessarily kind of having to kind of strike out on your own for the whole time. What else do we recommend you do? There's all sorts of things. Find a song from that local area, and make sure you dig into some local food. So anything which is more than just kind of the visual, so things which affect your sense of touch. Drinking water from holy wells is a fantastic one. Singing songs and taking the time to kind of have a good sniff of the wildflowers and along that changing landscape along the way as well. It's all really good. Okay, I'm going to pause there, I think, other than to say you can find a big long list of suggested pilgrim practices on the British Pilgrimage Trust website. I'm going to go to the questions. I see there are 61 comments in the chat. Hopefully they're not all questions for me. I'm sure there's a lot of those about the failed slideshow. So Alex, can I rely on you to kind of curate those questions for me?
Well, you absolutely can, Dawn. I've got to say, thanks so much for that. And it's just wonderful to hear you speak. Don't be alarmed. All the questions are all the comments are not questions.
Okay. Good.
So you don't have to now go on a huge kind of question binge.
Yeah.
But there was one question which I did flag, which was about PLBs, which was a question from Christine about personal locator beacons and whether they work in Europe. But you've covered so many things there about safety measures and precautions that you can take. There's a huge host of there. I did do a quick Google search, Christine, and apparently they do work in France. That's as far as I got. But what basically, just to relay to you, Dawn, that the kind of the feedback, there was some really interesting points being made in answer to the question of why people go on pilgrimage. So it'd be lovely, I think, for you to be able to have look back and read some of the responses.
Oh, wonderful.
And to all of you writing in the chat, thanks so much. I think it's working really well. It's great to see people interacting and communicating. I think we all know, those of us who've walked pilgrimages, that generally other pilgrims are generally a very good source of information. So do please keep asking each other as well. And the other last thing to say is just how wonderful it is to have such an international audience. So I've got down Jennifer and Christine from New Zealand. We've got Mark from Canada, Chris, California, Grant from Nova Scotia in Canada, and Ken and Terry from Alberta in Canada. So please do, I would encourage you all just to keep writing. If you've not already, please do write in the box and tell us where you're watching and listening from. That would be great to hear from you all and find that out. And who knows, you may find out that somebody is your next door neighbor. But no, I'm not seeing any more questions here directly for you, Dawn. But do save up any questions for the end, more general questions that you have, and we'll work that into the Q&A. But thanks so much, Dawn. That's been terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And just to, it was a superb presentation. Really appreciate that. Lots of wisdom in those slides. And just to reiterate that we will have some more Q&A at the end. And if all of a sudden you think, Dawn has got the answer to my question, just stick it in the chat and we'll pick it up and we'll deal with it later, either on the call, or I'm sure we can socialize things as well if we end up with too many questions. However, I'm aware we're just a little bit behind time, so just moving on to David Andrews. David, you're going to tell us all about the wonderful walk you did in 2023.
Hello there. Yes, I am. I'm going to first of all see if I can actually get the this thing shared with everybody, and we'll establish that before I press on. So just give me a second.
And just while David is doing that, just to encourage people, as Alice was saying, to talk to your neighbours and see if they're interested in joining the confraternity and perhaps even walking at least part of the Via Francigena. So, David, it looks as though I can certainly see your first slide very well.
Yeah, is that showing now in presentation mode?
Yes, it is. Do you want to just transition to the second slide quickly and then back? Yeah, it's gone backwards and forwards. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I shall plunge in. That's me up there. Hi there. I'm David Andrews, and I work as an ecologist in England. I work for an organisation called Natural England, and in 2023, I took a career break to walk the Via Francigena from Canterbury to Rome, and I very much conceived it as something I wanted to do in one go. And I was very fortunate, very lucky, and very privileged to be able to take that time. And I'm very mindful. So anything that I go on to say about the virtues of doing the whole thing, I'm very mindful that not everyone is able to do that for logistical reasons, or they haven't got the time, or for other reasons that they couldn't possibly take it on in one go. But it made sense to me to do it that way. Before I move on to the proper slides, I'm there pointing up at the signpost where it says Via Francigena to Rome, 1,800 kilometers. That's wildly inaccurate, as it turned out. I walked 2,200 kilometers. Now, I may have gone horribly wrong, but I don't think I did. That's what it might be if you were a crow flying, but it's rather longer than that. Right. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about why I did the Via Francigena, why it appealed to me, a little bit about planning and the practicalities of it, but I would sort of leave that to you to ask if anything specific at the end that you want to know, because it's impossible to cover everything. And woven in amongst all this, I will start to go into basically a slideshow, some sort of to give you a flavour of the overall route and the things that sort of that were particularly striking to me are all about the kind of walking the ancient route way and being on a daily basis for weeks on end out in nature and in this sort of changing landscape going from north to south. So the map here shows the route I took, the route everyone takes, but that's pretty much, what I did. It includes from Calais, there actually is a dog leg that takes you along the coast before you cut back in, but I didn't do that. As soon as I got to Calais, I was very keen to keep going south and feel like I was going in the right direction. So that's what I did. So why the Via Francigena? Well, the bit that you can see on the right there is something that I did a couple of years ago. I walked from Canterbury to Dover on the North Downs Way, which is the local path, which actually doubles up and sits underneath the Via Francigena. And I had not heard of it. I became aware as I was walking along the path. There was lots of wonderful sort of installation art from Dover Arts Development where they've celebrated the Via Francigena, and I started to be curious about what this route was. And when I got to Dover, I was very strongly pulled to sort of keep going, and not to swim, but to regroup and look at the feasibility of continuing this thing when I realized it took you all the way to Rome. The other thing is that I had a very strong pull to be reconnected to Europe. I'm not going to get political, but I mourned the fact that we'd made a sort of a symbolic and an actual break with Europe. And this seemed to me to speak of the longer historic ties that we'd had. And it very much appealed to me. The idea of walking slowly at walking pace and seeing those changes step by step, going from north to south. And I started to conceive of a plan. The opportunity to do this was one I really made by talking to people at work, and I realized that I'd been working for some time and I'd hit a point which sort of touches on some of the stuff that was mentioned in the previous presentation, that I needed to mark a change in my life. I'd been through a tumultuous few years, and this seemed to be something that spoke to me and drew me to do it, to mark those changes and to try and get beyond it. Once I'd settled, and I did look at other possibilities, and but once I kept coming back to this idea, and therefore I had to work out when best to do it and all the practicalities that went with it. My idea was that starting in late summer would take me into the autumn as I went south, and would hopefully give me the best chance of avoiding extreme weather and heat. And it didn't turn out that way at all. I started in late July in Canterbury, and it basically pelted with rain for 2 weeks and was freezing cold, and then it got very, very hot indeed. And it sort of oscillated from one extreme to the other, and was 30 plus in late October, as I remember when I got to Italy. But anyway, it was a good idea. And I think even if I did it again, I would still go around the same time, starting in Canterbury in late summer. I know a lot of people favor the spring route, but the other thing I wanted to do was walk over the Alps. And there is, as many of you will know, there's a limited window of opportunity to do that. They're mainly open during July through to September reliably, although with the way climate change is going, there is no reliability anymore, and that's another big theme of my journey. Was a sense that changes are constant, but it's picking up pace. A few other things on there. The Schengen rules. Now, this is an international audience, and so I think people are probably well used to the fact that they need visas. But this was something of a novelty if you wanted to spend more than 90 days, and I did. I wanted to stop on the way. I didn't want to rush this, and therefore I got a French visa, which allowed me also to stay in the wider Schengen zone for more than 90 days. And I very much felt that that was worth it. It was quite a lot of grief to get it, but I'm very pleased that I did. I won't say any more on that because it's going to be different in every country. But if anyone's got specific questions on that, then you can ask me later. Backpack versus trolley. I had looked into the idea that I might tow my goods with me. I decided that backpack actually was something I could probably manage, and it felt more flexible to me. But one thing that I would recommend is don't listen to anyone. Different when people start recommending very, very strongly, it's a personal choice, and it depends what you can do, what you want to do, and how long you've got. And it's lovely to see that Ken and Terry are on the call, and Ken and Terry will tell you great things about their trolley experience. And yeah, I mean, it's a personal choice, and different things will work better for different people. The main essentials to take are the wet weather gear, a decent pack if that's what you're taking, particularly with an air vent on the back, was something that I was always grateful for, and some decent sticks. I went for shoes. Other people will say boots. Again, there's no right answer. Accommodation, the only time I booked a very long way ahead was when I started. I knew that France was going to be booked up, was going on holiday, including most of the hoteliers. So I did book about 3 weeks ahead or thereabouts before I left. After that, it was just a few days in advance. And in Italy, I occasionally just turned up at places. One of the things which I was keen not to do was not to over-plan and pre-rehearse everything, every aspect of this. And I think I just about got the balance right. So picking up the pace, this is where I started in Canterbury. That's the mile 1 post outside Canterbury Cathedral, walking the North Downs and crossing the Channel, and then immediately faced with hundreds of miles of farmland. I really enjoyed the experience of the repetition. It was never really the same, the light changing all of the time. And as an ecologist and naturalist, I really enjoyed the sort of minute changes by the wayside. I was constantly looking at verges, much to the chagrin of anyone who I was walking with. And there was always something beautiful to look at, even to start with, when it was absolutely filthy weather. Most of the time, you'd get these amazing breaks of light. So this is moving in through northern France. There were breaks in the weather, and there was some beautiful villages to be got through before you hit the World War I battlefields, which I'd never been to, and again was something that I had wanted to, in other circumstances, visit these, and it was a great opportunity to walk quietly and slowly through or along and behind the Western Front. Extraordinary graveyard with this wall of remembrance that had 500,000 names on. And there were hundreds of mentions of just my family name, which isn't that common, Andrews, and it was an extraordinary thing to encounter. even when the weather was a bit miserable, there were just always these sort of striking monuments, whether they be these slag heaps, the terrils, or these ruined abbeys. And the Somme is now basically large tracts of farmland and wind farms. But and another thing that made the French experience particularly a very rich one. I'm quite familiar with Italy, or rather, I've visited Italy more than any other country. But my experience in France was fantastic, to actually have time to go to places that I've never had the opportunity or made the time for. The great Gothic cathedrals of Laon, with these extraordinary filigreed architecture and these amazing well, animals. What do we call it? Gargoyles was the name I'm struggling for. It was amazing to sort of wander across large areas of open farmland and to suddenly encounter these extraordinary vertical monuments. Champagne was the point in the journey where things got really very, very hot for the first time, and that I think many who've done this will know the blessed feeling of sticking your feet in the water when things are just relentlessly hot day after day. And so it continued. I think once you get past Châlons-en-Champagne, there's a choice to be made of routes around whether to go around the Marne Valley or to go what's called the cool route, which was anything but. And this long Roman road was an incredible feature of that. And I'm very glad I did it. It was also it was my first encounter with one of the real one of the real revelations of the French section, which is staying with host families. And I would recommend anyone who has the opportunity or does anything in France to make sure that you take the booklet that the confraternity publishes on accommodation and book in with a host family. You will be forced to speak French and nothing but even if you can't, and I speak very little French, it's an amazing thing to do. And my first families I stayed with were along this route. And I have a very fond memory of staying with somebody who very much wished that I would go to mass with them when I arrived, and drove me all the way back to where I had walked from that day to do it when I agreed, which was very funny. But she did drive me back again as well, so that was fine. An abiding pleasure every day was just looking out and the flowers, which and the bird song, which accompanied me basically all the way to Rome. I was surprised, going into October and November, but as you sort of headed south, there was an extraordinary array of wildlife. And there's one of its more flamboyant members on the left. That's an elephant hawk moth caterpillar. And it looks a bit fierce, but actually the head is on the other end. It's on the tail, if that makes sense. Again, the ever-changing riches of the architecture as you head down through France. This amazing Burgundian roof, which is quite psychedelic. And perhaps, the key joy of walking these routes is walking for weeks on end and see absolutely no one, and that's very much a possibility in France. And then just converging at some point, which you can't really predict, with a bunch of other people. And these folks had got to that haystack before me with several bottles of wine, as be said, and there was none left when I got there. But they were very happy, and it was great to see them. I'd seen them the night before, so I did know who they were. And yeah, so this was the first sort of pilgrim picnic that I came across. I think one or two others further south from that, rather. occasionally you would walk or you would meet up with people that you didn't see again, and occasionally you would just encounter people further down the trail, which is it's another sort of feature of a route like this. And Hervé was somebody that I encountered several times, and we would pass the time wisely with a glass of champagne or the Ricard that he's imbibing, filthy stuff, but he liked. That speaks for itself, and that is very much at the extravagant end. That's not really daily pilgrim food, but it was the occasional joy in France was to have something like that. And yeah, a pilgrim host on the right there, who was particularly generous and wonderful, and did a very, very fine boeuf bourguignon, which I shall remember for some time. This was I was encouraged to try that, and some I regret actually that I didn't really quite have the wherewithal to do it, but the fellow insisted on showing me what I was missing. As you head out of the central regions of France and you start to head into the hill country, into the Jura, that was another particularly lovely part of the journey before you head into Switzerland. That's quite an important photo to me because it represents everything that really you will encounter, which is that the countryside is inextricably linked to the routeways through it. It's always been a route of commerce and trade, and these great big highways are very much as much a feature of the walk as the landscapes around it. Into Switzerland, the heat really picked up, and Lake Geneva was very much like the Caribbean. Another sort of freestanding episode in amongst this sort of wider journey was the journey across the Alps, and it was good to do that, even though this was a long solo journey, and I'd very much enjoyed it as such. But it was good to hook up with people from time to time, and going across the Alps with, this is Jan from Denmark and Hugh from Scotland, was a mini adventure in its own right. We stayed together for 5 days and then parted company on the other side of the Alps. This is the St. Bernard's Pass, and what I would recommend is go to the Italian side for dinner. It's much cheaper. On the other side of the lake, I should say. If you've not been there before, you cross the Italian border, and there is another hostel just on the other side. These peerless views down into the Aosta Valley. And you know you're in Italy, the shrines start to become very, very regular and frequent. The Po Valley was a place where all of the sort of hallmarks of climate change have really been felt, and it's not the wet place that it once was. It's drying up, but it's still sort of heaving with mosquitoes. It was very, very hot in October, but it's actually still a haven for wildlife. That's a mole cricket, an extraordinary creature that you won't find in England, and I was very pleased to meet it in mainland Europe. The air pollution is quite, it's very apparent. It's one of the most polluted places in Europe. This is around the Piacenza area, and they've got it particularly bad there, but they have to live with it. We just have to walk through it. I would heartily recommend, if you were making a choice between walking around the Po or crossing by river, this is Danilo, who's very famous on the route, and you get far more than a boat journey. You get quite a lot of theatre and history involved as well. One of the benefits of stopping reasonably frequently is that you find small towns, not just the big famous ones, have got incredible treasures. This is Piacenza, and I went to the museum there, which I didn't know there was any that was going to be there, but there was a beautiful Botticelli there. That's just the marble quarries of Carrara, which are I've heard of, but with the extraordinary scale, whole mountains taken up with these quarries. That's not snow, that's marble, and they have their own weather systems. These hilltop towns obviously are a feature of Tuscany, and there are so many of them I couldn't possibly name that one. That is San Gimignano, and it's pretty obvious because of the sheer number of towers there. And my favorite Italian city, and I think I'm unequivocal about it. Siena. If you're going to stop and rest anywhere, do make sure it's Siena. Extraordinary jeweled place, absolutely dripping in ornamentation and incredible painting and sculpture. But more importantly, fabulous ice cream, and that is a what was that? That was blackberry and melon, which sounds a little unpromising, but it was absolutely fabulous and very fine cappuccino art. The landscape of Tuscany, I've been to Tuscany before, was not quite as won over as some people are, but I have to say that it won me over this time. And you get these extraordinary things like this where the grass is beginning to come back through, and it's very otherworldly. Very much a hallmark of the trail is seeing pilgrims ahead, and you catch up with them, or they catch up with you, and then you part company again. More examples of the extreme weather. There seem to be tornadoes happening in parts of Italy where they just come in and take out a small stand of trees, but everything else is untouched. These very vicious thunderstorms, very, very large hail. I think if you're going on this trail for any length of time, you will encounter extreme conditions. Certainly nowadays, and you just have to be prepared and be flexible because it can stop you in your tracks. Flash floods on parts of the trails are quite common, and I was very, very lucky in that my timing was such that I managed to get through with very little interruption. Dried up riverbeds, that's the mighty River Taro, which although it always has these big shingle shoals, there are quite there's a lot more water usually, I would think. Everywhere I went, you go out for walking in the evening and you turn a corner and there'll be something surprising, like these people dancing where there didn't appear to be anyone around. People loafing and hanging out windows or just reading. I think I said last time I don't know about this juxtaposition, but that it could be something to do with thinning vegetation and a crumbling exterior. Otherwise, I'm not sure why I've put those two together. On the final furlong, as you approach Rome, these umbrella pines become very much a feature of the landscape. And these amazing tufa gorges. And another major feature of the journey is the dogs, and I must have been barked at up to 500 times across the course of. I worked out a rough average, and it can be heart-stopping, along with being a pedestrian on Italian roads, which is the other. And this was almost a combination because that dog, I didn't see him, and he parked in such a way that I almost jumped into the road where there was some equally frightening traffic. I did want to mark the occasion because I think he frightened me more than any other dog, and I walked back over to capture him in his full snarling glory. But by the time I got back over, he wasn't expecting me to turn around go back for more, and I just captured him looking a bit nonplussed. But he was livelier than that. And finally, after 95 days of walking and 20 days of loafing, I turned up in Rome on a brilliant sunny afternoon, and suddenly it's all over. 2 pairs of footwear is what it took me anyway, and I carried one of those in my backpack for quite a lot of the journey. I also pulled out this acacia thorn, which had almost made contact with my foot. That's my parting lesson: is don't carry too much in your rucksack. And I've just put a few bits and pieces of information on there that anyone can take a screenshot of. And I also have a blog that I've compiled my further writings of the diary of my journey, if anyone was interested. So that brings me to an end, and I don't know if there are any questions or whether we're going to save those till later.
David, thanks so much. That is brilliant. Really brilliant. And as you've all been typing away as well, so thank you all. And there are some questions, I think, which we could do a kind of quick fire on now, if that works for you, David, on a few, and then might not get through them all, but do save up any for later. There was a question about shoes, but you answered that at the end. 2 pairs of shoes that got you through. That's from Harry. Seamus just wanted to know how heavy your rucksack was. Did you know?
I do. It was too heavy. And what I mean by that is that you generally are advised to what is it? There's a percentage of your body weight, and I think mine was probably 12 to 15 kilos most of the time when I had water, and because I had a second pair of shoes in. And I think for me, 10 kilos would have been ample, but it was still doable, and it wasn't that miserable. I got used to it.
So, yes, it's always the big question, isn't it? And I certainly know from experience that the 4 stages of my journey, I carried less for each stage of the journey. But
I did find that I did use everything I had. And I had binned everything I wasn't using.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
But I know that the whole thing about Schengen limits is a question that seems to have caught on with a few people here, especially as that's something that those do think about it. So would you mind just going into a little bit more detail now, David, on your experience of that? I know that you said that it's different from between countries.
I think the procedure for getting it is going to be slightly different. And the visa requirements are slightly different for everyone. But what they were in the UK is that we, since leaving the EU, you can stay for 90 days out of 180 days. So if you have stayed in Europe for a continuous 90 days in the Schengen zone, which is not entirely one and the same as the EU, but we won't go into that now, then you have to leave after 90 days and stay out for 90 days. But it's a rolling thing, and so you have to count back to see how long you've been, especially if you haven't been continuously within the Schengen zone. But you can get a long stay visa. I understand you can do that for Italy, but I did it for France. And in getting one, they gave me a 6-month visa, but that was oh so good for covering me for the whole of the Schengen zone. So even though it was issued by France, it allowed me to stay comfortably past the 90-day limit. And although the whole thing, I think, was wrapped up in 115 days or something like that, I then stayed on for another few weeks traveling in Italy, and I felt that it was worth the effort of getting it. And you start with an online procedure, and then it gets a bit more complicated than that. You have to demonstrate you're not going to be working and that you have the funds, that you're solvent.
Thanks, David. That might be something that others might want to pick up on a little bit later. As a sort of quick fire question, would you say how did you split your accommodation between, say, host families, hotels, Airbnbs, hostels? And I don't think you did any camping.
No, I did. I went intending to camp, or rather, I had a sort of bivvy bag and stuff for emergencies. I thought that if the weather was as hot as I expected it to be, which it wasn't to start with, then I would have done that. But after 2 weeks of not using it, I sent it all back home because I was carrying 2 kilos of kit that I wasn't using. I did split between all those other things. A lot of monasteries, particularly in the middle of France and for much of Italy, where you're staying in kind of hostels that are either run by sort of religious houses or the municipality, and they were great. And host families in France, but they kind of stop when you get to Switzerland, which is a shame. But I got a feeling that might be changing.
The question from Bob about whether you found how many churches you found that were open. Would you kind of have a rough percentage?
What of places I could get into?
Yeah,
having tried to get into. No, I mean it was very sort of hit and miss. I mean, my sense was that in most places I wanted to get into, I generally did, and if I particularly wanted to go or knew I wanted to go, then I would sort of try and work out ahead of time. But there were places where I was just not able to get into because they were only open certain days of the week. And because I was doing a very long journey, I just considered myself lucky to get in as many places as I actually did, and didn't get too hung up about things that I couldn't. And I think you have to do that. You could drive yourself you could get very frustrated. You have to just go with a spirit of openness, and things will be open.
There was a question about your photography skills specifically. I think that's caught quite a few people's eyes. Which camera did you use? Was it a phone camera, or did you have another camera as well?
No, that's very kind. It was a phone. It was quite a decent phone camera. I mean, it was an iPhone 13 Pro, I think it was, because taking pictures was quite important to me. But I'm not a serious photographer. It just helps me look and in a way, and so I thought that was the best compromise. A decent phone. I didn't want extra equipment.
I'm conscious that we'll want to push on here, and Phil's waiting in the wings patiently. But just as a final question, did you, and then we can pick up on others later, apologies if I've not got to your questions, did you use the Via Francigena app, or did you use a different navigation app while you were?
No, I used the Via Francigena app. It was terrific. It worked really well. Load it before you start walking, when you've got some Wi-Fi, and it will serve you well. And the other thing I'll just very quickly say is that I used an eSIM card for my phone, and it was absolutely terrific. I only had a few hours in the entire journey where I couldn't get signal.
David, that is absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much. And if you'd be happy to wait a little bit around for questions at the end, because I think there's a few more coming away. But thanks ever so much. And back to Eamon.
Thank you. Thanks to David, and also to Alex there. So Philip, having walked the Via Francigena and the way to Jerusalem some years ago, would you like to tell us what happened next, and how has the experience influenced your life and activities since your work now with Pilgrim's Way? So hand over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'll try and get my slides set up from the beginning.
Yeah, I can see your slides already. Do you want to just do the transition and just make sure that's working? And yeah, it's working fine. Lovely.
Great, good. Hello, I'm Phil McCarthy, and I walked the Via Francigena in 2008. I like David, I did it to mark a significant point in my life. I was 50 that year, and I'd done 20 years as a GP, and we were able to take an elector after that time. So I decided that I'd use my walking to Rome, and this is me at the end of the walk. And the wonderful thing is that I don't look a day older today. It's almost uncanny. At least I'm managing to convince myself of that. So just to introduce myself, as I say, I grew up in South London. I went to Bristol University. I was a GP there for many years. I'd done 20 years, and I decided to mark it by setting off and doing the Via Francigena. I'd always loved long distance walking right since I was a small child, and pestered my family to walk with me, and later friends walked the Pennine Way after my O-levels, which is the exams we do at 16 in England, and carried on with this love really, and it sort of culminated in this desire to walk to Rome. So I'd done 20 years by then and felt it was really a time for me to have a break. I could feel my empathy levels wearing a little bit low, and so I thought I need to do something different and to reflect on my life. I set off in the spring, directly after an early Easter, and that meant that I did cross it was quite cold for the start, and I did get some snow in northern France. I also, when I got to the Alps, there was still deep snow, which meant I had to borrow snowshoes and walk across alone across the Alps in snowshoes up to the Hospital of the Great St. Bernard Pass and down the other side. And then the arrangement in 2008 was that you gave your snowshoes to the parish priest in the first parish you met, and he took it back through the tunnel next time to give it back to the shop that you'd bought it from. I don't know if that arrangement still works. And then I went back to general practice. I did that for quite a few more years, but in 2014, I decided to retire and to do something different with my life. And that led me into another journey. So I decided, sort of facing really a period of discernment and deciding what I wanted to do, that I'd do another long walk. And so I decided to walk on from Rome to Istanbul, and I did that in 2015. So that means you walk down what they call the Via Francigena del Sud, along 2 more Roman roads to Benevento, across the Apennines to Bari, from where I met my son, and we crossed the Adriatic to Duris in Albania, and walked there together across Albania, which was a really fascinating walk, and really one outside the usual pilgrim paths. And then he left me, and I carried on across Macedonia and northern Greece to Thessaloniki, where I met 3 friends, and we had Easter on Mount Athos, which is the holy mountain of the Eastern Orthodox, and it's a little monastic all-male enclave. And then I did my back-in one of the hostels and had to take a week off, realized I couldn't keep up my walking plan, so I bought a bike in Alexandroupolis, and I cycled round to Gallipoli because it was 100th anniversary of the British and Anzac and French landings there, and my great uncle had fought at Suvla Bay. I wanted to see where he had fought. Like David before me, I had a reason with the Somme, because I actually wanted to visit the grave of my great uncle who was killed in the Battle of the Somme and the Battle for High Wood in September 2016. Sorry, 1916. And I also wanted to see where my great uncle Dan Canty had fought in Gallipoli. And then I cycled on from there to a place called Bandirma on the southern side of the sea, and then got the boat to Istanbul, which is where I finished my trip. So I wanted to talk briefly about what we're talking about pilgrimage, but what is it? And I thought this is quite a good definition, although definitely a Catholic definition. So it's to go on pilgrimage, says Pope Benedict, really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God where he has revealed himself, where his grace has shone with particular splendor and produced rich fruits of conversion and holiness amongst those who believe. And although it is a sort of robustly Catholic definition, as you'd expect from the Pope, I think it's one that we can all translate into words that make sense even in a secular world, in that to go on pilgrim really means to step out of ourselves. And it also means to go on a process of encounter. If you're traveling alone, it may be encounter with yourself, it can be encounter with the environment, and it can be encounter with others who may be very different from ourselves. And it's often a pilgrimage to a place which has particular significance to us, whether it be for religious or other reasons. and it's also a trip which leaves you open to personal transformation of some sort, whether it be in a religious or a spiritual sense. And I think that there is a particular pilgrim spirituality. When I set out in 2008, everyone would ask me, well, is it a pilgrimage then? And I'd sort of obfuscate, because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into their expectations. And I wasn't at all sure what a pilgrimage is in the modern secular world. But I think there is a definite spirituality which people of all faiths and none very often embrace, which is that it's a grounded spirituality. You are very small, you're made aware of that, you're very close to the ground, your progress is slow, you're very vulnerable to the elements, you're not flying above them, you're actually subject to them and subject to the rapid changes that happen. You encounter others and you're very dependent on the kindness of strangers. And I think that was one of the things I took away from it. And I'd really echo what Dawn said about how so many people you meet are just genuinely kind. On my long walks, I'd never met anyone I don't think who meant me harm. It's also a liminal experience, so you find yourself on the edge of things. So I set off in 2008. I was a sort of paid up member of the medical establishment, and suddenly I was a backpacker passing through places, never stopping. Someone sometimes viewed with suspicion, particularly I found in Italy, and certainly it's a very different experience. And I often encountered gratuity. I remember stopping in Bonaconvento and the priest there saying to me, here's the pilgrim money box. And I said, don't worry, Father, I put some money in. He said, no, you've misunderstood me. It's the pilgrim money box. If you've got any money, you can put it in. If you haven't got any money, don't worry. And if you need some money, we'll take it out. So it was a very different approach to the one I think we're used to in the UK. And I think the sort of pilgrim spirituality is a challenge to individualism in that you're walking a covenantal journey. So you're walking a journey in the footsteps of people who've gone before you, and in the hope that people will come before you, in the hope that people will follow you. So you're in relationship with those in the past and those who are to come. And it's an experience of going to what an American academic whose name has just escaped, William T. Kavanagh, has called hallowed places. So if you imagine yourself as a tourist, people are often looking for an exclusive experience, which means not many people there. But for a pilgrim, the more special a place is, the more pilgrims there are. So it's for a tourist, perhaps more people hollows out the experience, but for a pilgrim, it hallows it. That is not, of course, to say pilgrims good, tourists bad, because we are all pilgrims and tourists. We do a bit of both and all at the same time. So after I left practice when I came back in 2015, I decided what to do, and I looked around for various jobs, and I did a job working within the church for 5 years, leading a network of charities called Caritas Social Action Network. And in the sort of middle of the pandemic, I retired from that, and I went back to the NHS and started doing a lot of vaccinations as we were rolling out the program. But then I realized that I wanted to do something different. And having gone for a walk one day between my parish and which is in Bristol and Glastonbury, I realized that I was on a pilgrimage and that it was a truly wonderful experience and that I'd benefited so much from the pilgrimages that I'd been on. And I wanted to share that with people. So I decided on a project which I called Hearts in Search of God. So the aim is to promote walking pilgrimage in England and Wales. And I'm doing that by creating pilgrimways from the 22 Catholic cathedrals to one or more shrines in the same diocese. So some may be long, some may be short. The idea is this is not just for Catholics, but it's to welcome people of all faiths and none. Opportunity, obviously, for Christians to deepen their faith, if that's what they're looking for, but also for anyone to experience walking pilgrimage in a Catholic context, because I think we've got a particular and very interesting experience in history in this country. So my inspiration and hopes for the project were really, I was inspired by the impact of pilgrimage in my own life. I was aware of what a difference it had made to me to walk to Rome in 2008, physically and psychologically and spiritually, and also the second walk in 2015. I found that there were existing diocesan ways and people had set them up, and that was a great inspiration. I also hoped that the project would in some way be a small part of recovery from the pandemic, and I was starting off in 2022, which was still the early days of recovery, thinking that we needed to get back in touch with the environment and also in contact with each other, and particularly to encourage young people who have been so badly affected by the pandemic. I also think that pilgrimage in England and Wales, and because you can take it by public transport to the start and end, is a much greener alternative than jumping on a plane and going abroad. And if you talk to Catholics, they'll often talk to you about pilgrimage, well, to the Holy Land or to Lourdes, and they might talk about the Camino, but very often it does involve air travel. So I thought it was a greener alternative. And also a bridge with the secular world. I was aware of the British Pilgrimage Trust, the interest that there is in academically in pilgrimage studies, and also from the government in terms of travel industry rebuilding low-level sustainable tourism. And an opportunity for the church to provide a welcome, hospitality, and spiritual accompaniment to people. And one of the inspirations, specific inspiration, come from the words of Pope Francis, who said, of pilgrims, whoever they may be, young or old, rich or poor, sick and troubled or curious tourists, let them find due welcome, because in every person there is a heart in search of God, at times without being fully aware of it. And I think that's true of all of us. None of us are fully aware of what we're seeking in life, but we're all on some sort of search for meaning and purpose. So starting off in this project, obviously I wasn't starting from scratch. There's quite a lot of infrastructure that I was building on in England and Wales. So there are 22 dioceses, and there were 22 cathedrals when I started out, but there's a new one on the Isle of Man, which is a co-cathedral with Liverpool. There's also cathedrals I found of the Ukrainian and Syro-Malabar eparchies, so these people obviously from Ukraine and from Kerala. This is the Cathedral of the Holy Family in Exile, rather tragically named now, of the Ukrainian people in London. There's also the Cathedral of the Bishopric of the Armed Forces, which is near Aldershot, and there are also churches of the Ordinariate. So there's quite a lot of infrastructure there. And I could also find 44 shrines, 9 of which were classed as national, so approved by all the bishops, 21 within their diocese, and 14 informal but otherwise important shrines. And of course, anyone can set up a shrine in their own house or by the wayside, as we often see in Italy, but these are the ones that have formal recognition. There's also the parishes en route, who I hope to encourage to become places of welcome, and at least by providing stamps for people's passports. And there are existing walking pilgrimages that I mentioned, but also other diocesan pilgrimages, which may be by public transport. There is one in my own diocese, for example, to Glastonbury every year. And last year we walked out to Glastonbury, and that was the first time that had been done for many years. So the progress that I've made on this project to date, I started off in late 2022, and I was very fortunate to get a grant from the Sisters of the Holy Cross to cover the cost of the website, which is up there and is pilgrimways.org.uk. There are now GPX files and maps for all the routes at all the dioceses. There's full walking guidance in 14 to date, and I hope, if my health and back survives, to have completed all the rest of it by September this year. There's quite a lot of background about pilgrimage, about the theology of pilgrimage, about anthropology of pilgrimage, about the academic study of pilgrimage, and there's also quite a lot of prayers and meditations, some from the Jesuits. And there's lots of practical resources like pilgrim passports, which you can download and print off, stamps and certificates. And I've got plans for this year and the next, which is to complete all the walks. We've just had an ecumenical and interfaith Welsh pilgrimage event in Cardiff this week, which was absolutely great and involved members of all the faith communities in Cardiff, and involved us moving the new cross of Wales from Llandaff Cathedral to the Catholic Cathedral in the middle of Cardiff. This is the cross that King Charles gave to the church in Wales to mark his coronation, and really is a remarkable, splendid thing. It has inside it relics which are said to be of the true cross given to him by Pope Francis. I'm also planning a conference for diocesan youth and Jubilee coordinators, which will be in person and online in May. I'm hoping that the PDFs that I've done will gradually be turned into booklets, so something a bit more formal and better looking than the PDFs. And I'm hoping to encourage all the dioceses to undertake walking pilgrimages during the Holy Year, which will be 2025. These are where all the pilgrimages are around the country. I'm just going to give you a small flavour of some of them. So this is Glastonbury in my own diocese, an ancient site, but also the site of a martyrdom. This is the beautiful St Mary's Way in the Lake District, Holy Stone Well in Northumbria. This is a recusant house in Leeds. This is the Romero Shrine to Archbishop Romero, who was shot down in El Salvador while saying mass by right-wing guerrillas, you might remember, in the early 80s. This is Carlton Emmaus House, a village for formerly homeless people on the Northampton route, a community that was started by a French priest, Pierre. And this is the Blessed Cyprian Tansy, whose shrine is the end of the Nottingham Way at Mount St Bernard Trappist Abbey. He was a Trappist monk there. So there's lots and lots of variety, lots of interest, and I hope that some of you might be interested in walking in England as well as to Rome. So 2025, as you're probably aware if you're thinking of going to Rome, is a Jubilee. Jubilees go back in Scripture right to the start of the story, when the story of creation is that God worked for 6 days and rested on the seventh. Then it was taken up, obviously, by the Jewish people as the Sabbath, and then by a sabbatical every 7 years, and then 7 times 7 is 49. So every 50th year was a Jubilee, during which there would be an effort to rebalance society. Slaves would be set free, grudges would be given up, and people would be let off their debts. And that's restarted in the Christian tradition from about 1300, and now is every 25 years. And one of the big metaphors of this is the opening of the holy doors in the basilicas. Of course, this is a physical gesture, but it's also a metaphor. And if you can imagine the pilgrim getting to the threshold of somewhere with their heavy pack, and we've talked about how heavy our packs can be, but also a pack of the stuff that we carry from our own lives, the mistakes we've made, the broken relationships, and all the rest of it, and leaving that at the door, crossing the threshold, and trying to make a new start. So there will be open doors, actual and metaphorical, in Rome. There may be holy doors elsewhere around the world. But I've been fascinated by this phrase, pilgrims of hope, and I'm wondering why on earth the Pope would choose this phrase. And I think one of the things is because I think he hopes that all of us will become pilgrims in some way. We'll all become people who are searching for truth and meaning and a sense of purpose in our lives. And I think many people, particularly young people, often lack that. But I think he's also trying to emphasize hope, because if you look around the world, there's precious little to be optimistic about. I think we can all see that we're teetering on the brink of a third world war, which would knock the first and second into the complete sidelines. We're also on the brink, as David has discussed, of ecological disasters, and we seem almost powerless to avert these. We look at many of the sort of secular alternatives which the 20th century offered, and we've seen they've led to Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao. And we look at our own society, and which may be one of the best in the world, but nevertheless has led to a radical individualism and consumerism, which seems to be eating our societies and eating the world. And so there's precious little to be hopeful about. So what does it mean to be a pilgrim of hope? Well, the phrase I like comes from Václav Havel, who said, to be hopeful is not to believe that everything will turn out well in the end, because it may well not, but to believe that however things turn out, they ultimately have some meaning. And I think that's the sort of hope that the Pope is pointing us towards. So how to join the journey in England and Wales? If you're able to do so, well, walk the diocesan ways. If you're involved in parishes here, encourage them to open their doors, and it's a major problem. Some parishes, I hope, will offer pilgrim accommodation, perhaps through the sanctuary project that Dawn has mentioned already. I'm always looking for people to promote with these walks within the diocese. And I wonder if Pilgrims to Rome could encourage its members to undertake walking pilgrimage in England and Wales as well. So that's my bid for this talk. Finally, a bit of shameless self-promotion, but all proceeds to a very good cause of St. Joseph's Hospice in Hackney. I wrote a book about my first walk called Rome Alone, and then a second book about the walk to Istanbul called The Dusty Roads of History. They're only a tenner and good reads, I hope. And it's St. Patrick's Day, and I'm sure you would expect a bloke called McCarthy to offer you a quick reminder of the blessings of St. Patrick's Day. This is adapted for Pilgrims to Rome. So may your days be many and your troubles be few. May peace be within you. May your heart be strong. May you find what you're seeking wherever you roam. May the strength of God pilot us. May the wisdom of God instruct us. May the hand of God protect us. May the word of God direct us. And may your blessings, Lord, descend on us, and especially on those who roam to Rome. So thank you very much for listening. I think I can stop sharing now and get back to to you all.
So Phil, that was absolutely wonderful, and happy St. Patrick's Day, because you mentioned with a name
Absolutely.
like that.
Yes, amen. Okay. I see that. I see you too.
So I think we're opening things up to questions. Alex, how are we doing on the questions?
Well, yeah, we've got a few definitely to come, and I just thought for this next stage, I'm very conscious about time, folks. So you know, if you do need to log off because for whatever reason, don't worry about that at all. If you can hang around for a few more minutes for some questions, that would be terrific as well. Perhaps I could say if you are able, with the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, if you have a question at this point and you wanted to ask it directly, if you stick your hand up virtually, then we can unmute you and you can ask it. But just to pick up on a few questions that were sort of hanging over from before. There was actually a question, Dawn. I don't know if you're still. There you are, Dawn. Hi. Are you able to unmute yourself? There's a question from Ken and Terry, which is: has there been any upsurge in pilgrimage since the Harold Fry book and movie?
Yes. Yeah. So we've seen quite a few people get in touch looking for advice about making pilgrimage themselves that have been inspired by Harold's journey. What's been quite interesting coming out of it has been people that are seeing pilgrimage as a useful way of processing bereavement or sort of long-term illness in family. And I think coming off the back of the pandemic, Harold Fry's story, if you're not familiar, it's a fictional book, but it follows a journey. Harold Fry, who finds out a long lost friend of his has terminal cancer, and so he walks from the southwest of England all the way up to Northumbria, believing that all the time he's walking, he's going to help this lady stay alive. And so a lot of people have been inspired by that journey, and so we're putting people in touch with resources for 1 day and journeys all the way up to 3 months.
Thanks, Dawn. That's terrific. And actually, while you're unmuted, there was another question from Harry, which is: are there any plans to mark the old way, which Harry walked in 23?
Yes, I absolutely would love to waymark the old way. In fact, I've walked the entire route and plotted out exactly where all the waymarks need to go. The challenge that we've got is with some of the local authorities, not all of them along the route, but some of them are perhaps less cooperative than we'd like them to be. And so we want to make sure that if we're going to waymark it, the whole route is done, so you don't get partway through your journey and then suddenly find there's no waymarks anymore. So I'm chipping away at them. I've got some very good supportive councillors since some of the local elections, so watch this space. Yes, hopefully it will be waymarked in the near future.
Thanks, Dawn. Keep fighting the good fight. There was a question which is probably best for David. I'm also conscious that Eamon, who's been hosting this evening, is at the midway point of his journey. So he's made it to Aosta as of now. He's not actually in Aosta, as you can see, but will be, I think, in a matter of hours. Is that right? So
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
David, you might want to answer it. I certainly can add some things, but David, you might want to lead on that.
Yeah, no, that's great, but it might be that you can feed in, Eamon, if you can. But I think the question from Kathy was specific to you, David, which is, do you need a sleeping bag for warmth, or would a silk inner sheet be enough? And they're walking at a similar time that you walked, sort of July to October time.
I carried a sleeping bag a very long way before I needed it, but I did use it, and so I would say that it's good to have both if you feel you can manage it, but you could arguably pick one up further down the route. Just as walking through Tuscany, it started to get very, very cold, and I did find it useful to have a sleeping bag, especially in some of the unheated hostels, because they don't switch the heating on that early necessarily.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I can certainly say for myself that sleeping bag liners themselves were the with a real friend. They seem to do for almost everything. But there was a question which always comes up, which I think it'd be good to sort of ask rather broadly, is rather than focused specifically on David, which is the question of cost, and how to budget for a journey like the Via Francigena, which is of course over a huge sweep of time. I think it's a difficult question to answer because of course there are many ways of walking the Via, and certainly, you know, I can speak for myself. There was trying to do it as cheaply as possible meant camping quite often at campsites and so forth. But is there a kind of a daily budget, do you think, David, that we could that you might suggest, or does it depend on where you are? Certainly in Italy, it can get a lot cheaper when you have access to a lot more hostels.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one to answer in terms of giving a figure, because it really depends on what your must-haves are and what you can do without. What I would say is that whatever you budget, be prepared for that budget to basically, you're going to go well over it and then hopefully under it as well, and it will sort of find a balance somewhere in the middle. But there are parts of it which are almost unavoidably expensive, either through, for example, Switzerland, or because there are sections where you may suddenly just need to take more expensive accommodation than you would have preferred, but just because of scarcity of other options.
Thanks, David. I think that's
if I can chip in on that
yes,
one as
please,
well.
Eamon.
Having just come through France, finishing in October of last year. Yeah, it's really fascinating, this thing about budget, because it is quite difficult to say, well, this is how much it's going to cost you, because it is about preference. I was always staying in the lower cost option where I could. And I think something and some people laugh at this, say it's far too little, far too much. I think in the region of about €40 a night should see you safe. But I need to put a qualifier on that, and that is that some places, you're probably spending €25. So a number of the kind of municipal type places in France, they would just charge €20 for the night, and there was no restaurant, nothing like that to eat around, and they would give a tray of food for €5, so it was €25. There's a place going through Champagne where there was literally nowhere to stay, and I'd been really working hard at this, and I ended up spending £200 for one night, €200 for one night, which I thought, oh my goodness, that's totally blown my budget. But then I had several nights where it wasn't so much. So for me, kind of staying in fairly low cost accommodation, around about 40. But David is right. Make sure that you're able to do more than that, because you could end up by spending a lot more than that quite easily. You just have a few nights where, for instance, what happened in Champagne is there was some kind of festival going on. But by the way, the other one, just to pick up on that quickly about accommodation, hotels. Generally, what I was doing was each night thinking, now where can I get to tomorrow, and sending emails off. And it was normally, and for a lot of people, I think that's too risky. They wouldn't want to do that. But I never had a night where I didn't have somewhere to stay eventually. The worst example actually was Champagne, where I just went onto booking.com and just said, is there anywhere that exists within a certain area? And at that time, I was really pushing it. So I was walking 35 to 40 kilometers every day, which was great because I really enjoyed doing that. But it means that you get to places quite late and you're quite tired. So you really do need to have something sorted out. For you. So anyway, but was there a shortage of places in France? No. The by the way, the host accommodation, the families that give up their a room in their house or invite you to share a meal with them were just magnificent. You know, I was so full of praise and admiration for those people, and they were just hungry for life. Like David, I don't speak French, but all of a sudden, through Google Translate, we had some of the most wonderful conversations.
Yeah, I can't praise them highly enough. Really, it was one of the highlights of my journey.
Yes, and one of the great promoters of the local families in France putting pilgrims up for the night is Sandy Brown, who joined us at the conference before and who's brought out part 1 of his series of guidebooks for the Via, covering from Canterbury and through the whole of France. So he will provide a lot of information about that in his guidebook. There's a question about a follow-up question on dogs, David, which I missed before. And just to say thank you very much, Phil, for picking up on the question about the Balkans trail just there. I've just seen that you've replied. I think, am I right? There's also a Facebook group called the Jerusalem Way, which I know a friend of mine has found rather useful for plotting a course through the Balkans. Yes, David, dogs. I think mostly the dogs you're talking about would have been behind fences, but did you have any advice for other dogs that you might meet occasionally, not behind a fence?
Advice for the dogs. No, I'm sorry if that put the wind up anyone, and if I wasn't clear. All of the dogs that barked were behind fences, and I think only encountered one dog actually in the whole journey that wasn't behind a fence, and it was muzzled. I did have a warning that there was somebody had had a bad experience a few days before me, but I did not repeat that. It's helpful and it's comforting to have a stick with you, but I think by and large you should be fine, and dogs were generally behind fences in my experience.
Yes, I think if you're a lover of dogs, it can be sad sometimes to see them so behind fences. So yes, you sometimes have to pretend not to see them, in my experience. We're pretty much. I'm not seeing. I don't think I've seen hands in the air. So if I'm missing any questions, do please jump in on the chat. But I think we're pretty much there, folks. So was there one other question that I'd missed? Any other questions that anybody has seen I've missed? I don't think there are. So we may be drawing things to a close. You can wave your arms wildly in the air if you have anything pressing, but otherwise, this has been fantastic, and thanks everybody for making it such a great evening and for joining from around the world. It's very exciting to have you all in one place at one time, and thanks ever so much to our speakers, to Dawn, David, and Phil for their talks. That's been brilliant. So thank you all. And I'll hand over to Eamon to say a farewell. But from me, thank you ever so much for joining.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to add to what Alex has just said, other than look forward to seeing you out there on your pilgrimage, on your Camino, and when Camino. So good journey. Bon voyage. Cheerio, folks. Good to talk.
Bye-bye. Bye.